Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into what has to be one of the most wild life pivots in recorded history. We're looking at Ibrahim ibn Adham. He was an 8th century prince from the city of Balkh, and he had unimaginable wealth and absolute political power right at his fingertips. But as we'll see, he made a choice that absolutely baffled his contemporaries. He willingly abandoned his royal lineage, his vast treasures, and his throne. And for what? To embrace a grueling, wandering life of extreme poverty in the wilderness. It's a true historical epic of renunciation, and it literally laid the foundation for an entire spiritual movement.
Okay, let's dive into this by looking at his starting point versus his destination. The contrast is just staggering. He goes from a literal throne in Balkh, where he's escorted by guards carrying 40 gold swords and wearing the finest silk, to a desolate cave in Nishapur. And there, he's wearing rags and chopping wood just to survive. So the obvious question is, why? Why on earth would a man who had literally everything the material world could offer just decide to throw it all away? What triggers that kind of extreme shift?
Well, to understand his exit, we first have to understand his world. Ibrahim was born into a noble family of pure Arab descent from the Ijli tribe. He served as the governor, basically the prince, of Balkh. And Balkh was this massive cosmopolitan hub in Khorasan during a time of immense wealth and political transition between the Umayyad and Abbasid empires. His life was defined by extreme privilege. He spent his days in luxurious courts, received the highest education, and enjoyed leisurely hunting expeditions. He was quite literally surrounded by this illusion that worldly power and material wealth were the ultimate goals of human existence. But, deep down, an inner yearning was quietly beginning to stir.
And that quiet stirring, it suddenly became a very loud wake-up call. This is where the historical accounts begin to blend with some incredibly vivid mystical legends. The first bizarre catalyst of his awakening happens during a sleepless night in his palace. Ibrahim heard heavy footsteps up on the roof. Naturally terrified of assassins, he shouted out, asking who was there. A mysterious voice replied that he was just a friend looking for his lost camel. Ibrahim, completely bewildered, yelled back that it was ridiculous to look for a camel on a palace roof. And then came this piercing reply. "O heedless one, do you search for God in silken clothes and upon a golden couch?"
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer audacity of what happens next. While Ibrahim was holding court, totally surrounded by slaves with folded arms and wearing a jewel-encrusted crown, a stranger just unceremoniously barged right into the royal hall. The guards were completely terrified and overwhelmed. They literally couldn't stop him. This man was dressed as a humble camel driver, but Sufi legends identify him as Khidr, the immortal, enigmatic spiritual guide. Ibrahim, completely caught off guard, demanded to know who this beggar was and how he got in. Khidr didn't flinch. He simply looked at the prince and asked for a room, calling the magnificent palace an inn. When a deeply insulted Ibrahim shouted that this was the castle of a mighty sultan, not some roadside motel, Khidr presented a mind-bending argument. He asked Ibrahim who owned the palace first, then who owned it next, and who owned it now. By forcing Ibrahim to list this succession of dead kings, Khidr brilliantly proved his point. Because kings continuously come and go, passing on to the grave, this palace is not a permanent home. It is merely a transient caravanserai. We are all just passing through. As you can imagine, this revelation sent Ibrahim's head spinning. The surreal climax of this internal revolution occurred shortly after, right around the time Ibrahim was 30 years old. He was out on a hunting trip, passionately pursuing a deer. As he rode hard, getting separated from his retinue, a miraculous event took place. The very prey he was hunting, the deer itself, turned to him and spoke. And it gets crazier. Even his own saddle pommel echoed the voice. The voice delivered a direct, divine rebuke. "Was it for this that you were created? Is this what you were commanded to do?" This was it. The final, undeniable wake-up call. Which brings us to the actual night of his departure. Just look at how rapidly and decisively he moved. He didn't form a committee to discuss it. He didn't wait for the weekend. He rode back to the palace in deep distress, and that very night, he systematically gave away his vast wealth. He intercepted a local shepherd, swapped his expensive, luxurious royal robes for the man's rough woolen rags, and fled into the darkness. He literally had to use stealth and his new disguise to actively evade the search parties his own father sent out to retrieve him. In one single night, he completely severed all ties to his past. Now, to ground these magical, dramatic narratives, we really have to look at the foundational Islamic philosophy that Ibrahim was embodying here. The core concept is zuhd. That's the ascetic renunciation of worldly desires and material attachments. And it's not just about being poor for the sake of being poor, right? It's a calculated stripping away of distractions to prioritize deep spiritual focus and inner purity. Ibrahim became the absolute ultimate model for this concept, proving that the greatest barrier to spiritual clarity is often the comfort and complacency of material wealth. So the crucial point is how he actually survived once he gave literally everything away. That brings us to our next key term, tawakkul. This means complete and absolute trust in God's providence. See, Ibrahim fiercely maintained his independence. Once he was out there wandering, rulers and wealthy individuals tried to offer him lavish gifts, bags of gold, and cushy positions of authority just to ease his suffering, and he rejected all of it, every single bit. He believes that accepting royal charity would bind him to human authority and completely compromise his spiritual freedom. He wanted his soul entirely free from anxiety over his own sustenance. Far from some glamorous spiritual retreat, Ibrahim committed to brutal, back-breaking manual labor. For years, he lived in a cave in the mountains of Nishapur. He chopped heavy firewood, carried it all the way to the market to sell on Fridays, and bought just a single loaf of bread with his meager earnings. And get this? Even then, he would often give half of that single loaf to a beggar before eating the rest himself. This extreme self-discipline was his total commitment to fakh, or voluntary spiritual poverty. He didn't want to rely on anyone but God, and he earned his keep through the literal sweat of his brow. Let's move to and see how this builds into his ultimate legacy, the concept of spiritual sovereignty. Ibrahim proved that true power isn't a kingdom made of land. It is a kingdom of the heart. It's complete mastery over the self. The great poet Rumi later shared a famous anecdote about this. People once questioned Ibrahim's life choices while he was sitting in poverty by a river. In response, Ibrahim allegedly dropped his needle into the water, and miraculously, countless fish surfaced, each holding a golden needle for him. Whether you take that literally or as a powerful metaphor, the message is crystal clear. When you conquer your own ego and desires, the entire universe yields to you. That is true sovereignty. His impact on history was absolutely monumental. By simply walking away from his throne in the 8th century, he laid the groundwork for Sufi thought for the next millennium. I mean, he pioneered the entire model of the wandering dervish. His life transitioned early, individual asceticism into the structured mysticism that would go on to inspire heavyweights like Rumi and Attar. Really, his timeless critique of wealth is basically an 8th century cure for our modern hustle culture. He shows us that voluntarily stepping away from the endless pursuit of material gain is sometimes the only way to cure a toxic attachment to the world. Which brings us to a final thought for this explainer. Where are you searching for your camel? Are you looking for peace and purpose in places where they simply cannot be found, like on the roof of a palace? And what is the palace in your own life? What is the comfort, the status, or the material attachment that you might need to leave behind to finally discover your true purpose? It's a really fascinating challenge from a prince who literally had it all and decided that having nothing was infinitely better. Thanks for joining me as we explore the incredible life of Ibrahim ibn Adham.